Welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are having an excellent day. In this video, we've got a mid-range guitar shootout lined up, Yamaha versus Fender. Now, a couple of years ago, I did the entry-level version of this comparison. It was a Squier Affinity versus the Pacifica 112J, basically asking the question, well, what's the best guitar for a couple $100? So if you're more interested in the entry-level version of this, you can click the link above. That'll take you there. But these ones are more bona fide mid-range guitars. We've got the Fender Player Series versus the Pacifica 612. So what we're going to be doing today is a feature versus feature comparison and a tone versus tone comparison. We'll assign points as we go through. The guitar with the most points at the end will be crowned the champion. If you want full specs on these guitars, I will link to them in the video description below. Other than that, let's get going. All right, let's kick things off with Headstock versus Headstock. Now, I'm sure you noticed both guitars come with very nice flame maple tops. We'll talk about that in a second. But if you like a matching headstock, Pacifica is the only way to go. On Fender, you just have the option of the regular headstock. Now, that's just a visual thing. Let's talk about the features. Now, on the Fender, you get tried and true Fender regular tuning machines. They've been putting them on, these guitars for decades. They're great tuning machines. On the Pacifica, you get locking Grover tuners. So that's one huge point for Pacifica. You get locking tuners on this guitar from Grover. On the Fender, regular Fenders. So that's a huge upgrade for the Pacifica. You also get a Graphtec nut. On the Fender, it's a synthetic bone, which is a fancy way of saying plastic. So plastic nut, Graphtec nut. Again, point goes to the Pacifica. Add in the feature that you can have the matching headstock. Yamaha handily wins this one. Comparison number 2 is neck versus neck. Now on the Player Series, you can get this guitar with a maple fingerboard or Pau Ferro. I really hope Fender brings back the option for rosewood, but at least you get a couple options. On the 612 Pacifica, you get rosewood, and that's it. So there is no maple option. Now on the back of the neck, on the 612, you have a gloss neck, and on the Player Series, you have a satin neck, which is really nice. So you kind of get satin on the back and a little glossier on the front, and just gloss on the 612. Now, while we're talking about the necks, we should talk about the fretwork. Now, the fret ends and how they're polished and how they're shaped and sculpted, not amazing on either of them, to be honest. I've never been really impressed with Fender's fret end work, and Yamaha's is about the same. They're okay. In terms of the front face, the Fender was nicely polished up, so right out of the box you could do big bends and vibrato, and there was a little grittiness on the Pacifica. So I'd like to see the Pacifica maybe get a little bit better buffing on the front face. So I think this one definitely goes to Fender. You get two different choices of fingerboard. You get the option for satin on the neck. Well, not the option, it just is satin on the back of the neck. And the front faces were a little bit, glossier, shinier, smoother than the Pacifica. So neck goes to Fender. Next up, let's talk about these flame maple veneers. Now, as I mentioned, both guitars are available in solid colors as well, but it's nice to have the option if you want something translucent to give it a little bit different look. And if you don't know what a veneer is, it's just a very, very thin piece of wood, in this case flame maple, put over top of the regular body to kind of give it a fancier look. Now, in terms of finishes available, I believe the Yamaha has 3 options. This ruby red, I think there's a deep blue and a root beer finish as well. And on the Fender, you get a cherry burst, or I think it's a tobacco burst. But anyway, I'll link to them down in the video description below. You can check it out there. Unfortunately for the Fender, if you want the burst, it's a $30 upcharge. So it's a little bit more expensive than the regular solid colors, but it is a burst finish, and this cherry burst is beautiful. The nice thing about the Yamaha is if you want, the flame maple veneer or a solid color, it's the same price. So, buyer's choice. Price is the same. That's a nice uptick. So I'm going to call this one a draw because I think the burst finish is nicer on the Fender, but the fact that Yamaha does not charge you for that translucent finish is a huge win. So we're going to call this one a draw. Now, as for the rest of the guitar bodies, well, they're both very lightweight, comfortable, you know, ergonomic. They've got comfort cuts almost everywhere you want them, except for the heel joint. Both of them feature an old school squared off block heel joint. I'd love to see that changed on both of the guitars, especially the Yamaha that doesn't have necessarily the history with that, you know, going back to, you know, the 50s when when Leo Fender, you know, designed this guitar. It's time for a change. Player series included. You know, Fender's notoriously bad about, you know, adding features at the top line and like taking decades before anything else comes down. And to be honest, you know, Fender has a vintage series in the Squire line, in the Made in Mexico line, in the American Original line. So every price tier up, Fender has a dedicated, you know, vintage line. So let's get rid of some of these old school features on, you know, the American Professionals, the Player Series, and give us a nice rounded contoured heel joint, which makes playing much more comfortable. And you can still have all, you know, for the consumer, you can still have a vintage offerings all the way up. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that to Fender, you know, keep your vintage line all the way up and let, you know, players choose. And if you want something a little bit more modern, let's get rid of that and, you know, do what every other manufacturer is doing and giving the player a much more comfortable experience. So that's all I'm going to say. Both bodies are Alder. They're both very lightweight, comfortable, ergonomic, except for the old school heel joint there. They both feature that. Well, so far Yamaha easily won the headstocks, Fender won the neck, draw on the veneers, and draw on the body. Let's talk about the trem system, see if there's some big differences here. Now, when I did my big Stratocaster shootout, we took 5 Strats from Squire all the way up to Custom Shop, talked about all the different features on each one. If you missed that, I'll link to it above. But when we were talking about that one, I had a lot of praise for the trem system on this guitar, the Player Series. We've got a beautiful 2-point trim, bent steel saddles, easy to intonate and set up, and it holds tune. It's also got a very, very nice kind of slinky feel, and it's got a huge block on the back. So much to love about this trem system. Huge upgrade over, you know, the 6 individual, you know, screws. The downside, well, we're still doing this. Every time you pull it out of a hard shell case, you can't keep the bar on, so, you know, you stick it in, and you do this. You hope the little screw that you put in there doesn't fall out while you take the bar out and put it in its case. You got to check that screw's in there if you want to, or that spring's in there if you want to put one in there. Then you do this. Yep, still doing this. Okay, we got a little tension here, and then you just kind of hope it's about right and doesn't loosen up over time. And then when you want to put it in its hard shell case, because you got to protect something like this over a gig bag, then you're doing this. No, we're done talking about that. That's the downside. Clearly, every other guitar in this price range pretty much has a pop-in bar with a little set screw. You just tighten the set screw to the tension that you want, and then you can pop the bar in and out whenever you want. So I do have high praise for this Fender trem system. The screw-in bar is a huge miss in this price range. And these guitars, I think, are $750 to $800 right now. No excuses. It needs the pop-in bar. So once you're kind of set up, and if you perchance can leave the bar on, I mean, it sits so far off the body, even in a gig bag, that, you know, if people are pressing against it or it's getting banged around, you could pop a string or do whatever. But so anyway, that's all I have to say about that. I do like the way it plays. Hate the bar. I think that's a big miss from Fender. On the Yamaha, we've got a Wilkinson trem with a pop-in bar with a little set screw, so you can tighten up the bar however you want it and pop it out. Now, in terms of the saddles, intonating them can be a little bit more of a pain over Fender. Obviously, you should loosen the tension of the string for both of the guitars, but you definitely have to do it here. Then you have to use an Allen key instead of like just a screwdriver, and then slide your saddle forward or back, lock it down, tighten up your string, and check your intonation. So if you know how to do that, that's not a big deal. Or you could take it to a tech, but I think the Fender system to intonate is a little easier. But yeah, beautiful system from Wilkinson. So nice. As I mentioned during my individual demo of this guitar, this was one of the guitars that came to the studio and just held tune. You know, most of them I have to break them in for a week or two, and I usually play a guitar for a month before I actually demo it on the channel, so I like know the ins and outs of that guitar. But this one just held tune right away, straight out of the box. So love that. So I definitely have to give the win to Yamaha here for that Wilkinson trem. Like I said, it's maybe a touch more finicky to set up the intonation, but the smoothness of the bar and the set screw just kills over that Fender. So another point to Yamaha. Next up, let's compare electronics versus electronics. And here's where things get a little bit tricky. On the Fender, you get really nice Alnico 5 pickups, much more in line with the classic Fender tone than the old Mexican standard, which is a huge win. So that's great. You also get full-sized pots underneath here and a really high quality switch. So overall, the electronics on this model are very, very good. Now, when we move over to the Pacifica 612, well, it's kind of like a hit and miss because we get Seymour Duncan pickups, 2 single coils and a humbucker. Absolutely fantastic to have, you know, name brand Seymour Duncan pickups on this model. Not only that, you also get a coil split, which is also fantastic. So, I mean, so far that is a huge win. This guitar, the Fender, can also be had in humbucker single as well, but on that model I don't believe there's a coil split at all. So that's maybe a bit of a miss from Fender as well. If you're doing that HSS, it's nice to be able to split that coil and get some of that really bright zingy kind of Fender bridge pickup, which you can do here. Now, the downside to the Yamaha is on the inside, you've got smaller pots and the electronics are just not as good as on the Fender. So in terms of the Yamaha, that's an easy way that they can up their game, give us full-size pots, higher quality electronics. So the pickups are amazing. The switches and the knobs, they're okay. So again, I'm gonna call this one a draw because Fender is good all the way through, but maybe lacks some features. And the Yamaha has awesome pickups, but maybe lacks on some of the details. So electronics to electronics is a draw. All right, you guys, let's plug these guitars in and do a little bit of a side-by-side tone comparison. Obviously, this is very important when choosing an instrument as well. So here we go. Let's plug them in and take a listen. Now that we've heard these guitars played back to back, it's time to talk about the price. This is a big one. Now, the Pacifica is $650 US, and it is an incredible value. Grover locking tuners, Graphtec nut, Seymour Duncan pickups, splittable humbucker. Wilkinson trim, it's a great value. Now the weaknesses or the areas where this could be improved in my estimation is better pots and switches, maybe a little bit more detailing, just polishing up those front frets before they leave the factory. And that's pretty much it. This is an incredible value. Now, when we talk about the Player Series, well, it's a bit of an upcharge. Minimum I've seen them is $750 US up to $800. And if you want the translucent one, well, you gotta kick in another 30 bucks. So in terms of value, well, the Yamaha wins this one easily. It's a much better value and you get more for your money. Now the Fender is a fantastic guitar. This has been one of the best selling guitars out there for years and years and years. The Mexican Standard and now the Mexican Player. Unfortunately, the prices do seem to be marching up and up and up, which is unfortunate, but it is a fantastic guitar. And, just the fact that Fender is even offering these flame veneer tops is really cool. They never used to do that on their Mexican line. So to have that option is great, but you do pay a premium for Fender on the headstock. And I think that's really what comes down to it. Both of these guitars play exceedingly well. They're great mid-range instruments, but Fender on the headstock just seems to have a little bit more draw than Yamaha. So I think you get better features and better value from this guitar. But, the Fender is just an iconic instrument. So if you want the Fender, well, I think the Player Series is a very compelling offering. It's just a little more money. So in the end, the Pacifica edges out the Player Series on a few key points, namely the locking tuners and GraphTech accessories on the headstock, better trim system, more versatility with a splittable humbucker, and it's cheaper, better value here. And in terms of the Player Series, well, it had a few points over the Pacifica based on the neck, nice satin feel on the neck, and you can get it in a couple different fingerboard configurations, and pretty much just brand recognition / prestige. That's kind of like where the Player Series kind of maybe edges out the Yamaha and maybe like more kind of brand recognition or brand prestige. But there you guys go. Really interesting comparison. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments section below, well, which one would you spend your money on? Other than that, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.